I'm going to start this morning by doing the reading from Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 36 to 39. I will be reading this text from the NLT, New Living Translation version. I hope you'll forgive me. Terry said, put more of your body and less of the wall behind you in the video. So hopefully this works okay. I've just got my laptop sitting on a lap desk, sitting on my knees. So I apologize if it's really shaky. Maybe I'm a little too shaky. Deuteronomy 32, verses 36 to 39. That was a pause for you to get it found in your Bible. I just want to read this text, and then I want to make some comments on this before we move on to the gospel reading. Indeed, the Lord will give justice to his people, and he will change his mind about his servants when he sees their strength is gone, and no one is left, slave or free. Then he will ask, where are their gods, the rocks they fled to for refuge? Where now are those gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their offerings? Let those gods arise and help you. Let them provide you with shelter. Look now, I myself am he. There is no other God but me. I am the one who kills and gives life. I am the one who wounds and heals. No one can be rescued from my powerful hand. The first phrase of this, indeed the Lord will give justice to his people, it reminds us that God's commands flow out of God's character. A number of years ago, I purchased a portion of McCarthy Boulevard in Regina through the traffic violation fines that I paid for this particular stretch of road. And I remember having conversations with the police officers who administered justice in this particular instances, going, it really doesn't make sense for this to be a 50 zone. You went from a portion of the boulevard, McCarthy Boulevard, where you had lanes that were fairly close together, and you had houses that were not far off from the roadway. It's sort of a trunk that runs north and south on the west end of Regina, and we used to live very close to it, so it was a thoroughfare that we used regularly. But it went from, at one point in time, going through residential area, and then the whole space opened up, and it didn't open up into like playground area. It opened up into emptiness, I guess. I'm not sure how else to describe it. You would probably have at least 100 yards on either side of the roadway, with a good 30 yards between the north and southbound lanes. This vast empty space where there was nothing. And driving through it, I would say, it feels like it should be a 70 zone or an 80 zone. At the very least, it should be a 60 zone, based on the fact that all of the topography and the markers have changed. But in reality, it was still a 50 zone from the very south reach of it at Dudney all the way to the north reach of it at, I'm not sure how far north it goes now, but it used to sort of end up at, that doesn't matter. Anyways, so I would plead my case with the police officers, and they found it very amusing. Told me it was a pretty good hunting ground for them when it came to giving tickets, which I could attest to. And they told me on one occasion, hey, you're not the worst. Today we got somebody going about 15 clicks faster than you were doing on that stretch of road, which was supposed to make my wife of only about a year and a half or 2 years much more appeased. But anyways, I digress, but for a reason. When we look at God's commands and God's laws and the structure of them, they are never arbitrary. They're never without a very distinct cause and reason. It's not like, traffic violations in a place that might not make sense to us, but rather God's commands always flow out of God's character. If you think of the 10 Commandments, or what Jews might call the 10 words, each of these flows from God's character and God's nature. When we sin against God, it isn't that we're breaking some arbitrary command or law that's been given without cause. We are violating God's nature and God's character. It adds a weight to our sin in that we're not simply breaking a rule. We are actually rebelling against who God is. And in a sense, we're taking a shot at the image of God that we bear. So the commandments that are given to us by God in this regard, they are given to shape our lives in such a way that we are reflective of the God that we serve. And so when we read something like the Lord will give justice to his people, that flows out of the fact that God is justice, just as God is love. And the juxtaposition of these two things is, well, it's a lot of what the Bible is describing for us when it looks at how God has dealt with humanity from their inception. It's really this, not conflict, but setting the boundaries between justice and mercy, and understanding that the Lord, in administering justice, is always moving in keeping these two things in a perfect tension within his nature and his character. He shows love to us even as he disciplines us. The next phrase is problematic in my mind because it says he will change his mind about his servants. And we could spend the better part of a day going through passages that tell us that the Lord does not change. He doesn't change his mind. He doesn't change his thinking. Literally, one of the reasons that we have any hope for the future is because God is perfectly consistent in his character and its expression. He doesn't change his mind. There's no willy-nilly about God. So what do we do with this? Perhaps a better way to say it might be he will change his stance. He will change his approach. He will change the way in which he deals with them. And I think that that's a reasonable thing when we consider, for example, right from the Garden of Eden, you have animal sacrifices designed to cover the sin of humanity. What does God do? God kills an animal and clothes the man and the woman with the skin of the animal. So you have a sacrifice in order to cover. And that really becomes, in a sense, that becomes sort of the modus operandi for millennia, where God deals with humanity by putting to death something else in order to atone for their sin. You think of the whole Old Testament sacrificial system and how that's developed and how that is not perfected, but how it is used in a way that provides for situational holiness or temporary holiness. So in this case here in Deuteronomy chapter 32, you have the Lord changing the way he approaches his servants. When he sees that their strength is gone and there is no one left, then there's this dialogue that takes place. And I find it interesting because the dialogue goes through phases. This is given to us by a narrator, right? So it's written from the outside looking in at God's working with his people or how he's going to deal with his people. So where are their gods, the rocks they fled to for refuge? Rocks here, better word might be the pebbles. If you think of the ridiculousness of somebody trying to hide behind something that's, 1/20th of their own height or 1/100th of their own height, that's the picture you get in this. They've run after gods who are supposed to provide refuge, but the gods themselves are so minuscule that there isn't any possibility that they can be of assistance. So then the next question becomes, well, where are these gods? They ate the fat of their sacrifices. They drank the wine of their offerings. They took from them, but they're not giving anything back. Where is them? Where are they? How has this worked out for them? And then the sort of the direct approach. The next phrase is, let those gods arise and help you. So now God goes from observing to sort of dealing directly with his people. You went to them, so they took your sacrifices, they accepted your offerings, they did. So now let them be the ones that step forward. And this is an idea that is found also in the Judges. And that's disturbing, because you think to yourself, we go from Deuteronomy into the book of Judges. That means we've passed through Joshua in terms of history and space. And we've come through a point where God has worked on his people's behalf. He's been the hornet that has gone ahead of them. He's provided for them coming into the land. He's chased out the giants. He has laid a fear of the people of Israel and of their God over top of all of Canaan. But you come back to this exact same thought again when you skip a book over and come into Judges. And you have the people again turning aside from God and giving their sacrifices, giving their affections, giving their offerings to gods that aren't gods at all. Gods that cannot help them, cannot shelter them, cannot be a refuge for them. And then God turns then in verse 39, he turns and the dialogue becomes an internal dialogue where the people are sort of eavesdropping as God talks within the Godhead. I myself am he. There is no other God but me. I am the one who kills and gives life. I am the one who wounds and the one who heals, and no one can be rescued from my powerful hand. It's such a short piece, in a sense, just a few verses, and yet it sets us up for Palm Sunday in our expectations. Because while we are 2,000 years removed from the events of Calvary, and wow, what are we, 4,500 years removed from this writing in Deuteronomy? I'd have to look that one up to know for sure. But while we are all of those millennia removed, we're in the same place. We're in the same place because we violate God's character, because we go against his commands. All of us do. And we offer our affection and we set our hope on things that surround us that can never help us, that can never respond to us. And God is still calling us back to himself and saying, I am the only one that can provide these things for you. You live in an age of technology. You live in an age of marvelous advancement. I think back to my great-grandmother, who I met briefly before she passed, and I think of the difference of the world that she grew up in and the world that my kids have grown up in. And they are light years apart in so many ways, and yet some things don't change. And while I have this instant access to news, I open up a new window in my browser and, it just fills with stories from around the globe. And I'm inundated with information, and I'm inundated with, in reality, I'm inundated with a lot of hopelessness. There is not a lot of hope on the horizon from a human perspective. And yet God calls us back to this idea. Listen, all of these modern gods that you're chasing, they're no different than they were for the Canaanites, no different than they were from what deceived and took my people astray thousands of years ago. I am still the unchanging God. My character has never moved a millimeter in all of these thousands of years. I am still the same God who is alone in the cosmos. I have no rival. I have no equal. I am the one who saves. I am the one with the power to give life and to take it. I am the one with the power to heal and to destroy. I can wound, but I bind up. And I think that sets us up to take a look at what the events of Palm Sunday are really saying in light of the context for Israel in that time. Deuteronomy, powerful stuff in our day, in our world.